I didn't know anything about it. I know when I got orders to go to the Western Pacific, it had to be explained. I got a guy that was a veteran to explain to me what's where it was in the world, what side was our ally. Here's the country, and our friends the North and the South. And I didn't know that.
I thought it would be an adventure. I thought, I suppose I was a lot of brainwashed by the war, John Wayne movies and all that stuff, and thinking it would be exciting. It's about what I thought when I first went over there, and I thought I was going to be doing, my part for my country when I first went over.
Good feelings.
Yeah.
I remember not knowing anything about the politics of it, but I remember thinking that it was pretty good to go and fight for your country. It was real honorable.
Proud of yourself?
Yeah.
Maybe that's why they took everybody so young.
Yeah.
Because you didn't know what was going on.
Produced its own fallout, like an explosion, a hydrogen bomb, that for years contaminated all who were touched by it. And to further the simile, the damage was not readily apparent. I talked in '69 about a series of secondary explosions going off in your life months and even years later. We've now come to put a handle on that called post-Vietnam syndrome or delayed reaction to stress or whatever we call it now, but the gut feeling was there in the late 60s and the early 70s, and yet we didn't, in this country, we being the VA, the society, and even many of us veterans didn't quite understand what was happening to us. I think now we have a clearer picture.
I think I carried around within myself it seemed like this lump of hurt and anger and possibly some self-pity for that year. I realized it was only a year out of my life, and it's just a small segment of time, but what an impact.
There's an anecdote that kind of puts it in perspective. It goes like this, that the World War II veteran came into the bar after his war, and everybody bought him a drink. The Korean veteran goes into the bar after his war, and he has to buy his own drink. The Vietnam veteran goes into the bar after Vietnam, and he has to buy everybody else a drink. Well, there is that feeling on the part of the Vietnam veteran that he was wrong. I mean, here's the guy who had the faith and did his thing, and he comes back, and all of a sudden he's to blame, you see. Well, he's not only to blame for Vietnam, he's to blame for losing.
My sacrifices and my suffering and my year that I spent in that place, with this intensity and with people that I knew dying and with the fear level that you can't even explain to somebody how afraid you can be in combat. But all that, and my reward for that was that I came back to the United States, and I was 3 years behind my peers and where they would be with their normal growing up. I probably had a calloused soul, and besides that, my peers recognized me as a sap.
The problems that we're talking about have emerged in other veterans, and we probably have failed to recognize them. They probably occurred after World War I, II, Korea. But I think we can look at the Vietnam veteran and say we certainly had a situation which pushed the veteran to seal his experience off. There weren't a whole gang of people waiting at the airport to listen to him talk about his war experiences. Families were having enough trouble coping with what was going on in the world at that time. The veteran himself may have come out of Vietnam with such feelings of guilt that he simply felt that he couldn't disclose it to anyone. It was so horrible, that it was so chaotic in his own mind, that he couldn't talk to anyone.
Well, I think there's a different set of problems that confront the veteran of Vietnam than did the veteran of World War II or Korea. Just from a psychological standpoint, the reception that veterans got when they came home, of course, was totally different than that of other wars. I do believe that the VA and the major veterans organizations have not recognized that fact and taken steps to deal with it. So I think the younger veteran really looks at the traditional organizations and the VA as not having the type of intuition or the type of responsiveness that they are looking for.
For 10 years, we've had all this bottled up inside of us and nobody to talk to about it. Nobody understands.
Nobody cares.
And nobody cares, right? You know, and as a whole, we all kind of have the opinion that nobody gives a shit about us, you know? Yet we've got all this built up inside of us, and there isn't anybody we can talk to about it because nobody understands. There isn't any way that I could explain what it's like to be over there. People have asked me, but you can't explain to somebody what a particular instance was like, you know, or what it's like to know that 15 minutes from now, you're just not going to exist. You're going to be dead.
For 10 years, after I left that country, if I heard a noise and I didn't know exactly what it was, immediately I would hit the deck. And I'm talking about on the street, downtown Minneapolis, it doesn't matter, something weird, loud happens over here and I hit the deck and I turn that way, I'm spooked. And it takes me a while to recover from that. That's not normal. There's a lot of guys like that out there that won't even try to get into a group like this because they don't want to be a crybaby or somebody that's can't hack or can't take it or something like that, and that is a lot of bullshit. That is, it's garbage.
I think you learn to avoid people or not make friends with people. My experience since I've come back is I try to avoid getting involved with anybody or with making any close friends because after a year in Vietnam, it doesn't pay off to have any friends because they might be your friend in there one day and the next day they're probably gone, you know. One of the experiences that happened to me when I first got over there, I wasn't there only a couple of weeks and we were out on patrol, and this guy who kind of showed me the ropes when I first got there and what to do and when to do it type thing, stepped on a 250-pound box mine and he just disintegrated him. And after that, I never got close to anybody, and I still don't. You can't, you know.
In World War I, we talked about shell shock. World War II, we talked about combat fatigue. The Korean War, there was not a label which really emerged around the Korean War. There was some toying with the language zombie effect. Then along came Vietnam, and there's probably a half a dozen terms: PVS, post-Vietnam syndrome, delayed stress, a lot of terms signaling the same thing, signaling that Vietnam veterans are having some kind of experience as a result of their involvement in Vietnam, which is problematic to them. The ambivalence about the war, devastating psychologically. When you look at how veterans of World War I, II, Korea were cloaked in honor, the parades, the books, the literature, the poetry, the positive attributions that were given to the warrior, which were never given to the Vietnam veteran, all have had, I think, a profound impact on the veteran and his ability to cope with it.
In every major conflict we've had, at least there was an overriding rationale that was somehow plausible, somehow believable, but that rationale disappeared in Vietnam, and the war went on as if it had a life of its own. And so coming back from that, it's like coming back from an automobile accident. I mean, you know, you just had no overriding rationale. It just happened. And trying to deal with that in your life is difficult.
The biggest impact for me was that I had to say to myself that that year was a waste. The other wars, there was something, you know, that, you know, I did this for my country, or I did this for whatever. What can I say that I went to Vietnam for? What a waste. And I think that's what maybe the post-Vietnam War syndrome's all about for the combatants to come to grips with that year of hell was a waste.
I think the thing that I've learned after 10 years of studying this issue is that psychologists tell me that the human being can undergo a great deal of stress, whether it's pre-Vietnam or Vietnam or World War II, Korea, whatever. So the human being can undergo a great deal of stress given one factor: support. You deny that support, and you take away rationale for service, and you have just isolated stress and the individual. He has no buffer. He has no rationale, no framework in which to explain suffering. And you leave, as one person put it, the veteran alone with his injury and his self-doubts. As one person put it, the reason I know that is that's the way I put it back in 1969. I said it out of my gut, not of any knowledge of psychiatry or psychology or anything else. That's just the way I felt. I felt very much alone.
The group has two major functions. One is to encourage members to share with each other some of their experiences in an effort to break through some of the isolation that's common among combat veterans. And the other function is to help them in whatever way we can to integrate the Vietnam experience into their personalities, give them some perspective on the whole experience, so that it becomes something they can grow from rather than something that stunts their growth.
I think that I've come to terms with my experience in the war. I've come to terms with some things that I felt quite guilty about that I actually did during the war, and it's been a real healing sort of a process for me over the past 6 or 7 months. And I've personally gotten a great deal out of coming here. And as a matter of fact, I hate to see it end.
I know now, after coming to this group for a half year that it's been going on, that I am more at ease with that year's experience. My goal wasn't to forget about it. It was to, I think upon the suggestion of Dr. Ferguson, to integrate it into present-day life, and it was a year of my life, and to integrate it into my life and go on living, rather than wallowing in it.
It helps to know that there are people, at least we care about each other, even if nobody else does. We have ourselves. And to me, that means a lot. My family doesn't care. My mom, she wouldn't read that article. She won't go to any movies or anything. She just completely writes it off. She doesn't care. And all she knows is that I came back in one piece, and that's all she cares about. My dad, he's never been much of a talker, so I only have 1 or 2 people that I know that are good friends, and I think that's one reason why they are good friends, because they did care, they did write me a lot, and they did ask me a lot about it when I came back, but that's all. 2 people, that's it.
Again, in my own life, the best therapy I ever received was not from a professional staff, although that was valued. The best therapy was from my own peers. Those are the only people, when I had my back to the wall, that I really trusted or believed, because nobody else was in my shoes except them. And we were like we were hanging together on a life raft. So that kind of peer group operation is what we have in our counseling program. And I understand that it's almost impossible for a World War II veteran to understand the Vietnam experience. It's so different than what a World War II guy went through. It's almost impossible for a Vietnam guy in his gut to feel that a soldier could go to war in this country and come back and be appreciated. I mean, he doesn't know that. It was not a part of his life. It was a part of the life of World War II veterans by the millions.
What's the point? You know, where's the patriotism? The Vietnamese people didn't want us there. They would convoy us from one place to another, and the Vietnamese people are throwing rocks and bottles at us, and we're supposed to go out and fight and die for them. You know, why do you want to risk your life for somebody that don't even want you there?
People out there have to realize that there's more to going to war than believing in your country and patriotism and defending against communism. That's the bullshit that this government and strong forces would like to have people believe. The working class people that end up being the saps, that end up being the cannon fodder in wars.
I think in our group, a lot of us, you know, saying what Bill has said, have come to realize wars are more for economics and to line somebody's pockets than they are to keep this country, you know, free. I don't want to see guys go somewhere else and fight a war like that again. I just don't. I don't want to have to see people have to get into groups like this in order to, you know, to survive in America.
What you, again, have is a set of circumstances, a crazy, bizarre war conducted under the most bizarre circumstances. We weren't prepared to deal with the ramifications of that. There's no indication, and I don't think there's any substantive data which says that Vietnam veterans as a population were any more crybabies, any weaker, any sicker than veterans of any other era. But you have a war that maximized the problems.
I came home with real mixed feelings. I remember flying home and feeling like I'd just done something dirty, okay? I wasn't very proud, and I felt kind of, I mean, like, it seems like after something like that, in an intense year, a lot of suffering, a lot of death, a lot of real icky stuff, that there'd be something kind of redeeming about it, but I couldn't find that. I felt kind of dirty, like I'd just done something dirty on one hand. And on the other hand, when I got home, I still felt like I had done something for my country, sort of. But that was real short-lived, because I remember I enrolled in North Hennepin Community College, and the first day there, I went into the student commons, and on the bulletin board there was this great big, really nicely, professionally done sign that says the real heroes, well, it prefaced it by saying the real heroes of the Revolutionary War were the people that went to somewhere and you know, resisted the bloodshed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then it says the real heroes of the Vietnam War are our brave young men that are going to Canada and Sweden and resisting the, you know, the waste of unnecessary, senseless killing, et cetera. And they really need your help. And then there was a box at the bottom of it where you could stuff your money into. And I thought, and I remember, I think that had more impact on me than somebody coming up and just punching me right in the nose.
I see a very embittered attitude, which I believe is the biggest problem. The attitude that the VA, the government, the society has forgotten them and that they are a victim of that thoughtlessness is really more detrimental than any of the singular problems that veterans have.
I'm so cynical, and I don't trust nobody. I really am distrustful, and I have to believe that it's got a lot to do with my experiences in the military. You know, where it was the blind leading the blind to the absolute max. It was just...
I think the most accurate statement, before I took this position, I was doing some talking to veterans on campuses, and one veteran said, "Why do I want to go to the VA?" He said, "I go in with one problem and I come out with two. The problem I went in with, plus now I am angry and frustrated for having waited for 3 hours, for having got the shuffle through the system. I won't do it anymore. I'd rather pay for it myself. I would rather go on hurting." I can't blame him.
I think that's why a lot of veterans criticize the VA, because more than anything, for attitude. Because they sense that the VA arose due to another experience, mainly World War II. and that wasn't their experience, and that people they ran into in the VA were not Vietnam veterans. And that's true.
Again, I think there has been some initiatives in the last couple of years that have started to bridge that gap. But for the most part, the agencies, the VA and the major veterans organizations are still controlled, for the most part, by veterans of older wars that just don't have the insight into the differences between the wars.
There has been an estrangement from veteran group to veteran group here. It's been like oil and water. It's been difficult to even have veterans of other generations and other wars to assimilate their brethren.
Self-help groups, veterans helping veterans groups, or community-based organizations have sprung up out of the need, out of the lack of response from the federal system. And the reason that they've been successful is really because their motive is totally different from that of the federal government. The self-help group is there basically on a peer group basis. Many of them have experienced the things that the clientele also is in need of help for. And there's a better trust factor, I believe. I believe Vietnam in itself has made it very difficult for one to really put a lot of faith in government or its agencies, and therefore the self-help group has been much less threatening, and people are much more willing to come to a self-help group than they are to a government agency office.
My main purpose as the street counselor is to go out there and bring the outreach to the area. That's what we're doing. That's not to say I walk on the streets and look at a guy and say, "Are you a veteran?" Surprisingly enough, though, sometimes you can spot them. Look in their eyes. I go out to some of the bars and put up our literature. You know, not necessarily that the vet's going to be there drinking, but for the most part, it's a social place. It's the places that no one has ever gone to before. They've never gone there, because if you're an outreach, you know, if we just sit in this building, then we're no better off than sitting down in the regional headquarters, whatever that is, 8-10 miles away. You know, it's just another building of the VA. So we got to go out into the community and tell people who we are, what we're trying to do.
Questions asked to me, what was it like? I don't think anybody really asked. I don't recall anybody asking what was it like over there. I think they says, "Well, we're glad to have you back home again." And that was pretty much the summation of this year of health, which is really something for me. But looking at them, you know, I was gone a year. Some people will go off to school for a year or something like that. This year of health for me, it wasn't, you know, I'm trying to look at where their attitudes come from and everything. And the shock value on me was, yeah, I anesthetized myself, so I think I didn't come out of that shock for some time.
When I came back from the war, and I enrolled in college almost immediately, and I got into a social science class, I guess, my freshman year. And the war was, of course, it was 1970 now, fall quarter. And the people were talking in class about the war in Vietnam, and they were like 18 years old. And I stood up and looked at this kid who was talking about the war as to what he knew about it, like he was an authority on it, and I looked him right in the eye and said, "You know what the hell are you talking about? You have no idea what war is. You back here see war as glamour. You may see it as a tragedy, but until you've lived it, you know, and I can't describe it, what it is. You know, the torment, the terror that you fear, the adjustment or readjustment back to civilian life."
I still have the nightmares. I still daydream about it. And I'm not sure that I really want it to go away entirely, but it's something that I went through. It's something that's in my mind, and it's something that I want to help myself with, and I want help with, and possibly helping other people with.
It was, man, you know, I feel, so you'd get on, I remember time to rotate and getting on the plane and those guys coming in and thinking, you poor bastards that had a whole year of this miserable stuff to do yet. Yeah.
You could see the difference between you leaving And the new guys coming over, just by the looks on their faces, you know, they were just sitting there, you know, wide-eyed and in awe of the place. And you knew what was going on, and you had this real cynical look and attitude to yourselves. And those guys are just white ghosts that came over in green uniforms. That's exactly what they do.
They look like kids still.
Yeah. And people that have been over there just for a year look so much different.
The average Vietnam veteran is 33, he's married, he's got a family, he's working, and he's making a success of himself. He may still think about Vietnam, I do. He may still have dreams about it, I do. He may still have doubts about it, I do. But Hemingway once said that life breaks us all, but afterwards many are strong at the broken places. I think to the extent to which Vietnam veterans can see other Vietnam veterans strong at the broken places, in other words, picking up their lives and moving on, even though it has been in a very private and yet courageous way, then we will begin to get away from the image of the Vietnam veteran as the drug-addicted crazy who is a misfit, rather than the good old boy G.I. Joe that we used to think of as the veteran coming back from World War II.
I get quite, questioned on the streets as to what makes the Vietnam veteran different from the World War II veteran and the Korean veteran. And I'd like to ask them out there, what makes us different? War is war, sure. I agree to that. It's no different getting killed by a Nazi or getting killed by a North Vietnamese. There's no difference. You're going to be dead. But my question is, why then did they let us be veterans? Why, when we came back here, did society perceive us, the warrior, as the war? We only went there because you sent us. Don't ask me why I went. Don't ask me why I went. Ask yourselves why you sent me. And if you can answer that, then ask yourselves why you let me go. And if you answer those two, then ask yourselves, why haven't you let me come back?